visualize the sculpture within. Then, gently.
How's this, Goodwin?
It's beautiful.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
I am so excited to talk about some Murloc custom cards. I think we have some great puns and some great designs in this video, so let's go ahead and jump into it. Up first here we have the Murloc Boom Suit from Faroon, a 2-mana 2/3 Paladin minion that is both magnetic and a mech, but can also magnetize onto a Murloc, which makes it this perfect fusion of mechs and Murlocs, both of which can be a big part of Paladin. I think it's so cool, both from a mechanics standpoint, but also from a theme and artwork and name standpoint. This card comes together wonderfully, and I can envision an aggro Murloc mech deck that comes together because of this card, giving you kind of two different branches that suddenly work really nicely together. Or alternatively, a card like this, you could just still toss it in a mech deck and it would be decent, or maybe even toss it in a Murloc deck and it'd be decent. You don't necessarily have to fuse them together, but that's what makes this so elegant and cool and just all around very well designed. I absolutely adore this card. Speaking of cards I like, I also like this one from M.U.R.L.O.C. This is Gill, the Driving Element, a Murloc minion for Shaman. It's a 3-mana 2/5. And it reads, start of game, if every minion in your deck is a Murloc, shuffle 5 evolutionary events into your deck. And the evolutionary event is a spell that just automatically casts when drawn that reads, adapt the Murlocs in your deck. They cost 1 more and gain the adaptation when summoned. So this is essentially a brilliant, genius card that takes this idea of evolution that Shaman is known for, and it applies it to Murlocs in a just genius way. It's so smart and cool because there are these evolutionary events that change your Murlocs and they adapt to this evolutionary event. And that's how they suddenly evolve into something cooler and better. But your entire deck has to be built around Murlocs to make this work. So it has that start of game conditionality that's important because clearly this is good. But if you play this in a Murloc deck, say like a Unite the Murlocs deck, this could be the thing that gives your minions that edge and that extra oomph that they need to survive in a meta that's all about survival of the fittest. So both the name of this card, the mechanic, the way it ties into evolve mechanics for Shaman specifically, it's just so good. So I absolutely love this card too. So up next here we have the Seafood Chef from Hipster PhD, a 3-mana 2/4. It's a tri-class card. I don't know if that's necessary, but when you see the hand buff style effect, it does make sense to align into these particular tri-class elements. Maybe this was designed long ago in the Mean Streets of Gadgetzan era. I'm okay with that. I think it could be a neutral card too. But this battle cry reads, destroy a Murloc. So we have a Murloc tech card, of which we've seen a few in the past. But instead of this particular minion getting the buffs, he's killing that Murloc and serving it to his friends as a chef. So you randomly split the attack and health of that Murloc among the minions in your hand, applying hand buffs to those minions. So some things might get a couple attack, a health point here, a health point there. You're taking those stats and making them hand buffs instead. And I think it's just the best fantasy ever. All 3 cards so far have had fantastic stories and themes. It's just perfect how the artwork lines up so fantastically well with the effect of the idea of a chef feeding his allies, his friends. So I think this card is pretty close to perfect. So outside of maybe the tri-class element, and I would probably tweak the verbiage a little bit on the text, everything else is just so good about this card that I had to include it in the list. Moving on here, we have No Fin to Live For from Mr. Guides. Great pun in the name. This is a 2-mana Warlock spell. It reads, destroy a friendly Murloc, add 3 copies of it to your hand. And this follows that self-sacrifice theme for Warlock where you have to destroy something to get something else in return. And in particular, I like this card because it creates a really interesting dilemma. Typically, you want to destroy something bad, like an egg, where you get some benefit for destroying it. But with No Fin to Live For, there's a little bit of an incentive to destroy something good. For instance, you might want to destroy a Murloc War Leader in order to get 3 Murloc War Leaders added to your hand. And then you could play 3 additional Murloc War Leaders on a future turn and do something crazy. Whereas if you destroy a really bad Murloc, like a Tiny Fin, for instance, yeah, you could replay a few Tiny Fins instantly, but ultimately you're not getting all that much value or depth or power added back to your hand. So you have to decide what's the right target. Maybe it's a Battlecry minion where you're looking to get those Battlecries added back to your hand. There are a lot of different ways to play this, and I think because Warlock does always have that option to play really aggressive early game styles, a card like this is intriguing because you can create different lines of play. Maybe you destroy a Blue Gill Warrior to get 6 burst damage in your hand and you're looking for some kind of crazy combo. Those opportunities exist because of cards like this one. So I think the artwork is fantastically matched to Warlock. The name is amazing, and I think the effect creates some cool moments too, so all around a good card. Up next, we have Murky from Gamer Pro, and you guys know I'm a sucker for Heroes of the Storm related stuff, and although Murky may not be exclusively a Heroes of the Storm character, he is indeed somebody I got to know and love through Heroes of the Storm, and I think this card captures his Heroes of the Storm mechanics perfectly. If you don't know this character from Heroes of the Storm, he always dies and he comes right back to life, and he's just this incredible nuisance that's always just running up in your face and being annoying. And then you kill him and he comes right back. And that's exactly what this card does. This version of Murky has Rush and Death Rattle go dormant. Dormant, we've seen this before with Shera's in the Corpse Flower, very similar. And then to revive this version of Murky, you have to draw 2 Murlocs from your deck. So you pay 4 mana to get a 3/2 with Rush. That's an okay play, but certainly not great. That's understated. There are better minions at 3 mana than that. But you have this theoretically infinite resource as long as you keep drawing Murlocs. So that doesn't mean 2 Murlocs in 1 turn. It just means draw 2 Murlocs total. Unlike Shera's, and it doesn't have to happen all at once. So he might sit there for a turn. If you draw a Murloc the second turn, you draw another Murloc, you get another 3/2 Rush, and that's really good because you get this free resource that can instantly influence the board, and it's a Murloc, so it has those Murloc synergies. Some people might think that's actually too good, that this comes back to life easier than Shera's in the Corpse Flower. In some ways it can, but don't forget, in order for it to come back to life that regularly and that easily, your deck has to have a lot of Murlocs, and you have to draw Murlocs very quickly, because if you have a couple non-Murlocs in the way, it might take 3 or 4 turns to resurrect your Murky. So there is this really delayed feedback for this card. It takes a while to earn enough Murkies to pay for the sacrifice of the tempo loss that the initial Murky cost you. And I think that keeps this in balance. It keeps it in check. So it does exactly what Murky does. It's a balanced card. It's a neat synergy for Murlocs that we haven't seen before. So I think it's great. It fits and hits all the marks for me. So clearly an easy inclusion on this list. Our next card here is Second Wave from Poodlefez, a 4-mana shaman spell that reads, give your Murlocs Death Rattle, summon a random Murloc. And this card to me just feels so quintessentially Blizzard-esque, Hearthstone-esque. It's just exactly what you'd see in the game. If you told me this was going to be a card in the upcoming expansion, I wouldn't bat an eye. From the artwork, the name, the wording. It's just perfectly designed and realistic. Of course, it's very reminiscent of the card Primal Talismans that we have in Shaman now, except it's Murloc themed instead of Totem themed. But even that's something that Blizzard does. They always take designs that were almost there and change them into something that's a little bit better or a little bit more relevant. And that's exactly what Second Wave does here. And the name itself captures the fact they're getting a second wave of Murlocs. And that's one thing that's hard with Murlocs sometimes, right? You build this early board, but it's not resilient. It's not good enough to really stick or create problems for your opponent. One Duskbreaker, one Hellfire, and your board's gone. Second Wave gives you that backup plan. It allows you to reinforce your board, to make sure you can make that second push, follow up with additional synergies, play that Murloc War Leader or Gentle Megasaur on a board that's still sticking around for big time damage or pressure or whatever else it might be. That's what Murloc Shaman would need to succeed. Because right now it just plays everything, your opponent kills everything, you play everything again, and your opponent kills everything. There's never that sticky board state. A card like this would solve that problem perfectly, so it's a really good fit. Moving on, we have another card that might be here primarily because of its pun-based name. This one comes from Bahab the Warrior. It's the Abom-fination. Stick Fin in the name and you got a good chance of making this video. It's a 12-mana 8/8 with Taunt, and it reads, cost 1 less for every Murloc summoned this game. So this is essentially a giant for Murlocs. We've got a lot of different giant cards that get reduced cost when, conditions are met. But this time around, it's Murlocs and it's neutral. So a lot of different classes that are playing Murlocs can toss this in as that big prize piece when they've built enough Murlocs. And a lot like our previous card, I think this gives you that reward, that prize essentially at the end of your Murloc adventure. Like, you always play Murlocs, they always die. This gives you something to build on, to connect to really plant on the board and say, okay, I played a ton of Murlocs, this is my reward for achieving that. I think it's a really cool card, in particular in combination with Shaman's Quest, because you could do things like play a bunch of Murlocs, complete your quest, and then you play your Mega Fin and your Abom-fination at the same time. And it's like, okay, cool. Now I have this giant board of multiple 8/8s, a full hand of Murlocs. You could even, create copies of this card. All kinds of shenanigans in different classes allow you to do that. So it's a really cool puzzle piece for the Murloc build that hasn't existed before. Maybe it would be too oppressive. I don't know. Maybe Murlocs don't really need that because they'd be scary good. But as far as I can tell, they do need something like that. And I think Abom-fination would be a good solution to that problem. So I think this card's really elegant, makes sense, and the name and artwork are just perfect. Up next here, we have Captain Cookie, another card from Faroon, one of the more famed Murlocs, I'd say, in World of Warcraft history. Anybody who played, an Alliance character will remember the Dead Mines dungeon in the early leveling period, and Captain Cookie was a character that you would encounter in said dungeon, so a very beloved character, and he's a pirate and a Murloc, so this card captures that wonderfully. Captain Cookie here, 3 mana, 3/4 Murloc, and the start of game effect reads, your Murlocs are also pirates. So apparently Captain Cookie has recruited a ton of Murlocs to join his pirate gang if you play him in a deck. And much like we saw with Murloc Boomsuit, I love that this card fuses two different tribes together. I think that's so cool because now Rogue has a complementary piece to a pirate deck. It's sometimes hard to get by just on pirates, but what if you have pirate synergies and Murloc synergies going together? That's suddenly much, much cooler, right? Because things like Southsea Deckhand not only now buff your pirates, they also buff your Murlocs, and that means all these buffs and synergy effects are kind of doubling down in certain ways, so you have a lot more powerful options to build around, and because, of course, this is a start of game effect, that means it's reliable and consistent, so I think it would be a perfect way to create a new rogue archetype, or at the very least open up some options. And beyond that, thematically incredibly fitting. So a great way to utilize the character and the idea here of Captain Cookie. Up next, we have the Murloc Magi from Terminator 468, a 3 mana, 2/3 Murloc. And it reads, has spell damage +1 for each other Murloc you control. And once again, I think I like this card because it takes a deck that's kind of almost a thing in Murloc Mage, a deck that has seen successful win rates, just not a lot of popularity in Hearthstone, and it melds it together in an elegant and beautiful way because now you take Murlocs and you turn them into spell damage if you have a Murloc Magi. And, 3 or 4 Murlocs on the board, giving this card +4 spell damage, can create some real shenanigans. And some people might say, well, Regis, that's too many shenanigans. You can't just give a 3 mana minion +4, +5 spell damage. Okay, I think that's a fair argument, but do remember some things, right? To get a lot of Murlocs on board consistently all the time, you have to play a lot of Murlocs. And if you're playing a lot of Murlocs, you're probably not playing that many spells that benefit from spell damage. Beyond that, the Murloc Magi itself is an understated minion. It's very bad on its own. If you only have 1 Murloc or 0 Murlocs, this thing feels particularly terrible to play and doesn't really synergize with a standard Murloc strategy of outright aggression and big stat building and follow-ups with lots of damage, or minion damage at least. So you are making some sacrifices to try to make those two things fit together. It's not always going to fit perfectly, and it's going to have to line up really well to be good at all. And then what spells do you even utilize with Murloc Magi, and how much mana do you have to spend on those spells? there's a lot of questions to be answered there. So to me, it's not obviously super shenanigan-esque. I think there are some problems to making this card work, but the opportunity still exists, and that's what's cool about it. I think we need more utility Murlocs or Murlocs that open up other avenues of play. So every Murloc deck is not exactly the same thing where you take 12 to 15 Murlocs, you dump them in a deck, and you play this hyper-aggressive style. What if there were other ways to make Murlocs cool? This card, a few of the other ones we've mentioned, all help achieve that, and I think that's why I like them so much. So although this is, you know, a fairly simple card in a lot of ways, I'd say, compared to some of the cards we see on these lists, I think it's really clean, and it feels like a Blizzard card, and it's just a cool effect. So then finally, for my last card here, I went out on a limb a little bit for this one. I think some people will dislike this card, but I love it. I think it's actually really cool, and it sort of changes what we expect out of Hearthstone and changes some of the rules of Hearthstone in a really fun way. And I think this is something Blizzard really experimented with early on in Hearthstone's development, sort of breaking the rules of the game, breaking the fourth wall in some ways of the game, which we don't see much of these days anymore. Things tend to be self-contained, but this card would do that in a fun way. This is Nerglish Dictionary, and if you're unfamiliar with the term Nerglish, that is the language that Murlocs speak. Also, I think sometimes just called Murloc, but Nerglish is the that sort of stuff. And in this case, Nerglish Dictionary, a 2-mana shaman spell for Mr. British Dino, reads, change all card text to Nerglish, then summon a random Murloc. And Mr. British Dino here has included an example of what the changed or altered card text would look like. So Northstar Cleric becomes Murg, Murg, and then the text on Northstar Cleric reads Murg. That's a pretty good Murloc impression, right? But what this means is you can't rely on card text outside of numbers anymore. You have to have essentially an internal understanding of what cards are based on their artwork or based on their stats. And I think that adds a pretty fun layer of difficulty to the game. Now, I do know there are some downsides here to new players who maybe aren't familiar with their cards very well, but I think that's an okay sacrifice to make because I don't envision a card like this being particularly competitive. It does summon a random Murloc, so there could be some occasional high rolls, particularly in wild format, some of the higher cost Murlocs that exist. Other times it's not going to be a very effective play for a 2-mana spell to give you a Murloc. You lose out on some of the advantages there of consistency and reliability, or drawing Murlocs or playing Murlocs for things like Unite the Murlocs. There are some real downsides to it not being a Murloc at a base level, but being a spell instead. But nonetheless, it's just fun how much it changes the game, and it creates a great moment and a great story. And it's like, oh my god, I thought this card was this, but it does this instead. Or maybe you build a deck where you just play a ton of cards people forget about and they have no idea what they do. There are so many cool ways to use a card like this. So I don't know if Blizzard would ever do it because it just breaks so many rules and it could create bad experiences from time to time. But I think the good experiences, the amazing stories would far outweigh that. So I personally would love to see a card like Nerglish Dictionary. And there you go, folks. That's it for this video. 10 custom cards, really great designs this time around. You guys upped the ante. It was hard to pick for this particular video. So many good Murloc designs. Now for next time, for number 13, you're going to be submitting a weapon in Hearthstone based on a weapon from a video game. So for instance, you could choose like the Buster Sword from Final Fantasy VII and design a legendary Hearthstone weapon based on that sword. Or you can pick any other video game weapon you want and make a Hearthstone weapon based on that weapon. So it could be a gun from Overwatch. I don't care what it is. It could be medieval. It could be a shield from Zelda. Whatever you want, your favorite video game weapon, make a card based on that. Now get all those details in the description below. There's a link to the forum to submit your card. It'll have all the details. You can ask me if you have questions, but that's the theme next time around. Legendary video game weapons. Also, because we're now at the 12th custom card review, I'm going to be adding a poll to the description for you to go vote on your favorite card of my top 10 from the last 4 videos. I picked my 10 favorite cards in the last 4 videos. You vote on your favorite. Whoever gets the most votes will win a Blizzard gift card. We're still carrying on with that every 4 video prize, so be sure to vote in that for your top cards. All that said, if you guys have thoughts, comments, questions on these cards, of course, share those in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.